FISA warrant is finally out. And joining us on the line is the guy responsible for us knowing what is in that FISA warrant. You know him as Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. How are you, Tom?
Hey, Derek. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time. It's first of all, let me just talk about Judicial Watch for a second, because there was a time when journalists did what Judicial Watch does, the filing of Freedom of Information Act requests, the dogged pursuit of those Freedom of Information Act requests. That seemed to have stopped in late 2008, early 2009, weirdly. So I'm grateful for what you do, but Talk just for a second about how it is that it came to be you guys doing it and not the New York Times or the Washington Post, who have infinitely larger...
Well, there are other folks doing, actually. New York Times did too, for the record, as well. Look, we saw what was happening. Taking a step back, the Freedom of Information Act allows access to records. Not all the access you like. Sometimes you can't get classified information and things like that. And the Justice Department and the FBI were refusing to confirm or deny whether any such records existed, namely the FISA warrants related to Carter Page. Well, that changed when the president, in response to requests from Congress, declassified material about the Carter Page warrants, and that led to the Nunes memo that critiqued the use of the dossier in the FISA warrant application process. But we still didn't get the records. But because the president declassified them, those of us who were in court were able to argue we should get the records. And sure enough, they were finally turned over to us. They should have been turned over to us on Friday, but emailed to us late on Saturday. And they show that the records, that the FISA courts were misused by the Justice Department and the FBI in the sense that they were told that there was this information warranting spying on Carter Page, but they weren't told the information came directly from the Clinton DNC-funded Fusion GPS operation.
That's the thing about this warrant. First of all, so much of it is blocked out that we don't have a full picture, but you can get a pretty good shot of it. But they seem to try and imbue Christopher Steele with a lot of credibility. But they can't imbue Christopher Steele with credibility because they don't know his sources. He's not the source of information. He's the conduit of information, right? And so in many ways, the court was flying blind.
Well, they weren't flying blind in the sense they were relying on the government to verify this information because they certified that it was verified, and it hadn't been verified. And so when you look at the documents that have been released, a lot of it is blacked out, as you point out, Derek, but there are materials that are public related to the use of the Page, the Clinton DNC dossier. They use the dossier. They use stories about the dossier. They use information from the State Department that looks to be another version of the dossier, all generated from the Clinton DNC campaign operation. Talk about a self-licking ice cream cone. And the courts bought into that, and those who signed off on this, like Rod Rosenstein, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, others, need to be held to account for allowing this process to be abused in a way to target the Trump team. And, Mueller has benefited from this process as well because the warrants that were approved, the spying that was approved by the court, occurred during Mueller's term.
My guest is Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. Now, Tom, when you watch the news over the weekend and you're very active on social media and you see the journalists out there, particularly weirdly CNN contributors, running around saying, see, this proves that the dossier had nothing to do with the warrant. And Chris Cillizza just said on Twitter that the investigation was launched because Papadopoulos met with a professor in London. It had nothing to do with the Steele dossier, when that's clearly not the case. Please set the record straight, if you would.
Well, aside from the scam of the Papadopoulos issue, that has nothing to do with the warrant targeting Carter Page.
Right.
When they used a document created and disguised and laundered through a law firm to pay for the Fusion GPS, money that was generated by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee, and it was used by the DOJ and FBI in an improper way to mislead a FISA court to get access to the Trump team. Now, the argument is, well, Carter Page was no longer a member of the Trump campaign. But when you look at these records, it's all about the Trump campaign. That's what the focus was, and it's pretty clear they were hoping to get access to Carter Page in terms of surveilling him as a backdoor way of getting access to the Trump campaign, because it looks to me like they were hoping he was still in communication or operating on their behalf and colluding with the Russians. All made up, the allegations, all of which came from the Clinton operation.
As we go forward on this, I assume you're going to be filing another FOIA request to try and get this unredacted, or at least some of it, as we've seen with other things that the Justice Department has redacted. When later unredacted, they were not covered up for national security purposes. They were covered up because they would have embarrassed the Justice Department. Is there a suit going forward?
Well, this current lawsuit allows us to challenge the redactions as they are, but in the end, it's going to be difficult to do so, again, without presidential intervention, declassifying additional material, because we can see from the material that was declassified, it shouldn't have been classified to begin with. And my guess is there's more material they don't want us to see, not for national security reasons, but because it's evidence of a scandal and corruption. So the president needs to step in again, declassify the material, and then the FOIA process can work.
Why do you think it is the
people can get access to the information, which is the goal in the end, is transparency as to what the government was up to.
The president could declassify these. He could order these released in their entirety, or slightly redacted to remove some names or something like that. Why do you think the president hasn't done that yet?
Well, he's done it in part. That's why we have the records that we're talking about today. He should take additional steps. My guess, he's being scared off by the lawyers from intervening, but he needs to intervene.
The Mueller investigation is droning on. We've got Paul his case is supposed to start this week, and we learned that the grant of immunity that began, that you guys, the investigation that you guys helped uncover in the Clinton email scandal, they granted everybody immunity before they seemed to have any idea what they were going to say, and whether they determined whether or not they were a target of that investigation. When you're looking at the Manafort trial, there's allegedly 5 people who've been granted immunity. We're supposed to find out their names today if they haven't just been released. Is it safe to say that the deck is stacked, or is it just my partisan lens through which I'm looking at these things?
Well, Derek, I'm not aware that you have a partisan lens.
It's very partisan. I am totally conservative. I freely admit to it, Tom.
Well, partisanship is different than being principled. The difference is that you can compare. I think it's the short answer is you should compare and contrast the use of immunity in the Manafort case with the use of his immunity in the Hillary Clinton case. The use of immunity in the Hillary Clinton case was to no end other than to provide protection for people who shouldn't have been protected. The use of immunity in the Manafort case, it's assuming at face value that it's being done properly, is they're giving immunity to lesser figures to get another bigger figure convicted. Of course, that didn't happen with Hillary Clinton, since they weren't investigating or interested in convicting, let alone indicting anyone related to Hillary Clinton.
My guest, again, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, great organization doing that. The uncoverers of all the scandals in the Obama years that didn't exist. It's amazing how you found what didn't exist during the Obama years. But going forward here, what are you expecting to find? I don't want you to look into a crystal ball, but we're going to get dribs and drabs. You guys at Judicial Watch, you file FOIA requests constantly, and you follow through on them. Is there a vein down there that you're drilling for, that you expect to find something, good, bad, whatever, just interesting and newsworthy that we should be aware of?
Well, I can't predict that. I can predict that we'll find something that they don't want us to have. The question is what the timing of the release will be. I'm convinced that the deep state is slow walking this information in a way to protect Mr. Mueller and protect their own interests. The longer it takes to get out, the less likely there is to be accountability.
Of all the stuff that you found, have you found anything that, obviously you found things that the Justice Department, the FBI, the intelligence community didn't want out there, but they always claim it's in the name of national security, that you can't have this information, even the basics, whether or not this information exists. Yet when we find it, we find out it's nothing of the sort. There's nothing there that really endangers national security. They just wanted to not be embarrassed over what they found. Talk a little bit, because I don't think the audience understands the process enough of the Freedom of Information Act request and how difficult it is. All presidents talk about how they want to be transparent, and then they throw up barrier after barrier after barrier of that, to the point that it will take 20 years to get information out of our government now that wants to be transparent.
Well, in theory, the way it's supposed to work is you submit a request to a government agency at the federal level, and they respond with documents within 20 days. But that rarely happens. And so in order to get a response, you actually have to sue in federal court to get the records you're truly interested in. Now, if you're willing to wait around for years and years and years, you might get other records. But if you want a timely response, you have to sue in federal court. And but that's only, and then they may start producing records, not as quickly as you like, and then you get into the issues about whether the records are being properly blacked out or whether you're getting everything you should have access to under the law.
The government's excuse for surveilling Carter Page in this FISA warrant is that they believed that he had been recruited by Russians to be an agent.
They didn't believe that. They didn't believe that.
But was that not their argument?
That was their argument, but I don't believe they didn't believe it.
It's because I was going to ask you, if after a year of surveilling him with all the powers of the federal government, I would say after 6 months, I'd give him maybe 2 bites at the apple, and they found nothing to arrest him, right? How long can the federal government conceivably spy on an American citizen without their knowledge, in secret, with these FISA warrants, before they have to eventually say, all right, there's no oil in this well, we've got to stop drilling?
In perpetuity.
That's scary as hell.
Well, unless the courts check them and unless there's a public accountability like the one we're engaged in now, there's no check.
Because if you watch the media coverage of this, Carter Page might as well be speaking Russian all the time and eating borscht. It's a foregone conclusion that he is a Russian agent, yet he's never been arrested. Has he been approached by the government since, I think it was 2013 when they first approached him, to say somebody's trying to recruit you or interview him in any way, shape, or form?
Oh, I guarantee he's had communications with the government. My understanding is he is a cooperator and an asset of the FBI, and reportedly
he's the worst spy ever for Russia.
In prosecutions and reports to them on his trips to Russia, which makes the idea that he's a spy and the FBI was worried about him completely ridiculous and absurd, and highlights the fraudulent nature of their FISA application.
Yet he is the gateway drug through which they began the investigation that we're still dealing with now, that hasn't really turned up. All the people charged are either people who will never show up in court to face those charges, or people who have been charged with things that have nothing to do with the main crux of the investigation in the first place.
Well, there are a lot of problems with the Mueller investigation, and you're highlighting some of them. That's why I've been calling on it to be shut down.
JudicialWatch.org is the website. The man is Tom Fitton. I appreciate your time, and keep doing the Lord's work, Tom.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.